Hello, everybody. I'm Frank Harris. I'm a libertarian. I ran for Congress last year in 2018. I plan on running again in 2020. And this is my potential opponent, Geoff Young. Geoff Young and I have been friends for, I want to say 13 years. Approximately 13 years. We were Quakers together at the Lexington Friends meeting, and we agree on many things. We disagree on many things as well, but we do it in a very civil way. So I'm here to sort of interview Geoff and ask him questions about his campaign. Geoff's running as a Republican against Andy Barr in the Republican primaries. How are you, Geoff?
Doing fine, thanks, and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you and everybody that might be watching this. So let's get started with you actually changed parties to become a Republican. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, to make it as concise as possible, I changed parties because the Democrat Party leadership in Kentucky and nationally is completely corrupt, totally 100% corrupt. And what I mean is they routinely rig Democrat primaries to favor the establishment Democrat, the candidate who has raised the most money. So they believe that money should be the most important factor. And they rig their primaries, they violate their own bylaws, and they violate actual Kentucky statutes about how primary elections are supposed to be fair, just like every other election, general elections.
Well, I have some bad news for you. When I was a Republican, I left the Republican Party in 2012, closing in on 8 years ago, and I experienced many of the same things in the Republican Party. So just keep your eyes out for that.
Well, I'll have to experience it for myself. So far, I haven't seen any of that yet.
You'll see they're going to favor Andy Barr, and that's just how it's going to play out. So
I switched parties in July of 2019.
So now that you're a Republican, let's talk a little bit about one of the hot topics, which is the Trump impeachment. What's your take on the impeachment proceedings, and do you think that the Democrats are right to pursue this?
Well, I think that President Donald Trump definitely should be impeached, but not for anything that the Democrats today are talking about. So I think they're impeaching him for the wrong reason, for a very wrong reason, and that in turn will damage our republic, will damage our Constitution, and so on. Trump has committed war crimes in various countries all over the world. I'm thinking specifically of Yemen and Syria.
I was going to say Syria. I don't know enough about Yemen to make an intelligent comment.
Well, in Yemen, the Saudi Arabian government is war of aggression, an actual genocide against the people of Yemen. And that has been going on since, I think it was 2015 when it started, during the administration of Barack Obama. So both cases, Yemen and Syria, Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were in on starting these genocidal wars. And President Trump has simply continued and intensified both. So he has not changed direction in foreign policy at all. He's been dominated by neocons in his administration. And what we're doing in Syria right now is we are supporting Al-Qaeda. The United States military and CIA have been supporting Al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria since 2011. And they're still doing it today, and that's an impeachable crime.
In my opinion, you may agree with this or disagree with this, I don't see a significant change of direction in foreign policy since maybe 30 or 40 years ago. We continue to be involved in the Middle East, and I believe it's over resources. I believe it's over oil, and in the case of Afghanistan, rare earth elements and other minerals. So would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I would agree with it and say that also there are strategic reasons. I'd say it's the
I would agree with that too.
control of oil that the empire, I call it the empire,
Ron Paul would agree with that.
is most interested in. They want to control the oil, which is still the driving resource behind most modern economies.
Absolutely.
So if the United States can control the oil of the Middle East and other places, then the empire can essentially dominate other countries, tell their governments what to do, overthrow their governments, and by cutting off their oil supply or imposing economic embargo. And the United States can retain its position of dominance, but I don't think that's possible. I think we're losing ground to a multipolar world.
I would agree with that too. China is coming heavily into play.
Right.
Russia's becoming more and more forceful, and I don't
Right.
mean that in an aggressive way. They're gaining strength that they lost after the fall of the Berlin Wall 30 years ago.
We agree on that.
Okay. So what I see is that China is making an end run to circumvent the U.S.'s attempt to dominate in the Pacific regions. They've made strategic moves to acquire more territory by building islands offshore, which under international law, you're allowed to defend your own coastline within so many miles. So they've essentially enlarged their coastline artificially by building islands. And at some point, the United States is going to, I believe, take exception to that and say, oh, no, that's not playing by the rules. But I've also seen recently where China is building a huge number of naval warships, destroyers and cruisers and things like that. So they're gearing up to defend their coastline. And I believe they have a right to do that.
Okay, yeah, I would tend to agree with that in regard to the military situation in the Pacific, the South China Sea. But I think the larger picture is that China has an economic development plan for all of Eurasia. They call it the Belt and Road Initiative.
So Silk Road, is that the Silk Road?
The new Silk Roads,
yeah.
plural, and it includes both high-speed rail going from the Pacific coast all the way to, if possible, Western Europe.
And tremendous bridges. Have you seen some of their bridges?
Yeah.
Oh, they're incredible.
They are. They are investing heavily in that, and their goal is to economically knit together all of Asia and as much of Europe as is willing to cooperate with China and Russia.
I agree, and they're going to be able to then funnel natural gas, oil, and other resources toward China.
Right.
And at some point, the United States is going to do what they always do, which is try to cripple them, I believe.
Well, yes.
And it's going to be very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Morally, I'm totally against it, and I think I think that that's a sign of a tyrannical government when a government just feels threatened because somebody else is succeeding, and we don't like the apparent threat of somebody being our equal.
Right. The United States, at least the people who run the United States, the oligarchs, if you will, the billionaires and the corporations that they own, want to continue to dominate the world. They want a unipolar empire, and that's just not the reality. Russia in the military area and China in economic development are overtaking and passing the United States, especially in Asia and Europe.
I agree. Well, let's move on to another topic because we have a lot of ground to cover. We're up on the 10-minute mark, and so one of the things that you and I have talked about is, what do you consider the Republican position on Russia per se? And how and contrast that with what you saw in the Democratic Party or what you're seeing in the Democratic Party today.
Well, I think the Republican position has been pretty pernicious since the end of World War II. It's been confrontational against the old Soviet Union, and now that in 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed, they've been confrontational against Russia, but it's kind of steady. What I saw on the Democratic side is in 2016, the Democrat Party became Russophobic. Instead of recognizing that Hillary Clinton ran a poor campaign and deserved to lose by her own incompetence and arrogance, they tried to blame Russia for, quote, meddling in our elections.
It caught me completely by surprise, and I was kind of like, what are they talking about?
Right. Well, they made it up.
Yeah.
The FBI, the CIA, and the Clinton campaign just made up this conspiracy theory that somehow Russia buying a few Facebook ads changed the result of the election. And Russia had no motive to get involved in U.S. elections because they feared and distrusted both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They didn't care. They had no motive and no interest in who won the U.S. presidency in 2016. They were indifferent to who won. President Putin kept saying it's the bureaucracy that runs things. By that he meant the military-industrial complex.
I agree.
The deep
I agree.
state, the security agencies. And so he didn't care who was president. He knew that he would have to deal with the momentum of U.S. foreign policy over the past several decades. And so he had no motive to meddle. And he had a strong motive not to be involved at all.
What I see, and I could be wrong, I truly believe that both Trump and Putin have sort of a mutual respect for each other. I think that both of those leaders see war as something that hurts both sides. And especially when you throw in the threat of a nuclear war. Oh my gosh, nobody wins in a war, period, but a nuclear war, the whole world loses.
Right.
And so I think that Trump and Putin both see it in each of our country's mutual interest to avoid war at any cost. And I believe that we have much more in common with the Russians than we have disagreements. Now, what I see as the long-term foreign policy of the U.S. has been to systematically encircle Russia with that missile defense system that we have over there. And Russia sees it and recognizes it and would like for it to go away. It was supposed to go away after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had agreements in place that were supposed to guarantee that we backed off. And we didn't. We've actually pushed closer to Russia, where the last time I looked, we were within 500 miles of Moscow with this missile system, and I see that as a great threat to peace.
I agree, but so when you say that President Trump is opposed to war, all right, that might be true, but he abrogated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that mostly
I think Obama did
to
too.
Europe. No, I don't think he did. Trump just said we're going to withdraw from that treaty, and he did it by presidential power, and it's highly destabilizing. Europe, if the United States starts deploying nuclear missiles to Europe,
I think we already have.
We have, but if we do the the intermediate range missiles, which were outlawed by the
They're already there.
INF treaty,
They are there.
if we do that, President Putin has said that he will station intermediate range nuclear missiles in the Atlantic.
Whoa. Well, I mean,
On
with,
ships
with
and-
submarines, we already have that. I mean,
Right,
de facto, they're already there.
Right, but he's going to station more missiles in the Atlantic, and if there is a crisis and something happens, then our entire Washington D.C., New York financial center would be in range of conventional missile attacks.
I see.
Not
nuclear.
Not nuclear. And President Putin has said that if Russia is attacked, he will respond by attacking our leadership. And that doesn't make the news very often.
No.
But I think he's serious about that.
Well, I think the Russians are very serious, but at the same time, I think that the United States could go a long way toward de-escalating this situation, and I think it's in both of our countries' mutual interest to do that. So that's a very broad topic, and let's move on
Getting back to impeachment.
Yeah.
I think the two articles of impeachment that the Democrats in the House actually passed and voted to approve are a joke. They have focused not on Donald Trump's real crimes, which have to do with the wars in Syria and Yemen, and his illegal efforts to overthrow the governments of Venezuela and Bolivia.
Yeah, that was quite a surprise announcement about 2 years ago when we all of a sudden were talking about invading Venezuela.
Yeah.
That like, what?
And by the way, we recognize this random guy who, as the president, where he didn't even run. It would be as if China were to recognize Nancy Pelosi as the president and Donald Trump.
Wait a minute, Nancy Pelosi isn't running the country? Okay, all right.
Yeah, it was like if China recognized her and said, no, we're not going to talk with Donald Trump anymore. We're going to talk with the real president, Pelosi.
I love that analogy. That's a great analogy. Well,
Not original.
oh, it's not? Well, okay, all right. Well, that's all right. So we've talked a little bit about Russiagate and the Democratic Party being Russia-phobic. And what would you say in general, long-term, that the Republican Party position is toward Russia?
Well, I think most Republicans I talk to now, I only switched in July, but they're not that concerned about Russia anymore. So they're, I would say, more sane than the Democrats on the issue of Russia and whether we're an enemy of Russia and so on. A lot of Republicans still fear Iran. Now, that's another story. We can get into that some other time.
Another time, yeah.
But so this stuff about Ukraine and the president making a phone call, it's none of that is an impeachable crime. It's all just baloney. They made it up.
Well, it seems to me like since Trump has taken office that the Democrats have hounded Trump on anything they can possibly hound him about to try to create problems for him.
Yes.
And it seems like a lot of these things are a reach and that they're ignoring some of the deeper issues involved. Like in my opinion, maybe the way Trump has gone about trying to investigate Joe Biden's influence in the Ukraine is wrong. But at the same time, I see it as something that should have been done, that Joe Biden should have been investigated. According to some of the things I've seen, Joe Biden even admitted that he meddled in the Ukraine and was proud of it.
Right.
So how can the Democrats say that Joe Biden wasn't using his influence illegally in the Ukraine? They seem to ignore that, just like they ignore the fact that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party conspired to ignore Bernie Sanders in the 2016 elections.
Well, I'm going to put on my website, my campaign website is youngforkentucky.com, YOUNG 4 KY. You can find it there. I'm going to put up the articles of impeachment that I think would be valid. and which the Democrats show no interest in even looking at. Those have to do with war crimes and with threatening a nuclear attack against North Korea.
Wow.
That's illegal.
Wow.
It's illegal to threaten an attack.
And
Ever since the end of World War II and the formation of the UN, it has been illegal to actually conduct an attack or to threaten an attack. And Trump violates that all the time.
and people seem to ignore the whole immorality of war itself. And that's what I find just amazing, that people don't even consider the morality of war, the immorality of war.
Right.
And in general, the way war is conducted today, it's waged against civilian populations first.
Right.
Not military targets, but civilian, what they call soft targets. And I think that's morally reprehensible.
So what I will be attacking Andy Barr on next year is his enthusiastic support of so-called sanctions. When we sanction Venezuela or sanction Russia or Syria, what we are doing is directing our blockade against the civilian population in the hope that they will rise up and overthrow their government. Well, how would we feel as Americans if the rest of the world were to say, well, we're not going to send you any more food, oil, or medical supplies or anything unless you change your government? I don't think
Right.
we'd respond very well to that.
No.
And it's not human nature to give in to blackmail.
No.
Our
It's
country's
tyranny.
policy
It's tyranny.
What Andy Barr boasts about all the time is how these sanctions were applied with his vote in favor. He drafted some of the sanctions laws, and what it is economic terrorism, economic blackmail against civilian populations. If you want to use the word immoral,
It's terrorism, isn't it?
It's immoral.
Yeah, it's been said in many circles that the United States is the world's largest terroristic organization, the U.S. military and our foreign policy. So let's move on to the next topic, which you're much more familiar with this than I am. I'm not sure where you're going on this, but we talked about, was it removing ballot access or something like that, or removing people off the ballot, or?
Yes, Kentucky has a law, KRS 118.176, that allows any voter to challenge before the election, challenge the qualifications or good faith of any candidate. And so I've been doing this for the last 4 years. I challenged the ballot access, and it means to kick their name off the ballot.
Right.
I challenged Jack Conway's bona fides as a legitimate candidate in 2015 on the grounds that he and the Democratic Party had conspired to rig the primary. I was Jack Conway's only opponent for governor in 2015 on the Democratic side. And they just rigged it. They violated their own bylaws, which say that both or all Democrat candidates in a primary have to be treated equally by the party itself. They simply violated that, pretended that bylaw did not exist. And bylaws are binding. They have the force of law on any organization that has bylaws. They have to obey them, or they can get sued. So essentially, I sued them.
So is there a law on the books that said that political parties have to follow their bylaws?
It's part of common law. All organizations have to follow, including churches, which are the archetypal voluntary organization. Every organization that has bylaws have to follow them, or they can be sued by one of their members.
Or so what are the legal penalties that could be imposed on any organization that doesn't do this?
The jury could grant monetary relief, damages. I sued them for $20 million. So the jury could grant that, and the jury could also say, in the future, the Democrat Party is not allowed to rig its own primaries. So that would be declaratory and injunctive relief. All forms of relief in the courts are available to a member of the party if they cheat. And the Democrats seem to be addicted to cheating in their own primaries.
Well, I would say the Republicans do as well.
Okay, I'll find out. I'll find out about that.
And when I was a Republican, I left the Republican Party. I believe I said earlier in 2012. What we saw was that the Tea Party brought more life to the Republican Party than they had seen in a decade or more. And yet the Republican establishment in Fayette County and in Kentucky did everything they could to try to push the Tea Party outside of the party, and which I found amazing, because the Tea Party brought Rand Paul into office. And so that should have been a clear signal to the Republican Party that the Tea Party was on the right track. But for now, we're 25 minutes in, and we're going to be doing a whole series of interviews. I didn't want to make this much longer than this. So, do you have anything you want to say in closing before we say goodbye?
Well, I challenged Andy Beshear's ballot access in October of 2019, and that case is still before the Kentucky Court of Appeals. And so I will be pursuing that case, and I'll be asking the jury or the Court of Appeals or the Kentucky Supreme Court to find and declare that Andy Beshear was not a legitimate candidate for governor in November. And if that occurs, then I think there will be no reason why the General Assembly shouldn't impeach Governor Beshear and remove him from power for basically election fraud.
Wow. Powerful stuff.
That case is going on right now.
And as we were saying earlier, you and I have been friends for a number of years, and in many cases you've challenged the Democratic Party and the power structure, and I've said, Geoff, I believe you're completely in the right, but at the same time, I don't think you're going to win, because I think that the system itself is corrupt and rigged to protect the two parties. And would you agree with that statement, or would you disagree with that statement based on what you've seen so far?
I would agree with it, but what I try to do by these probes, by these lawsuits, is to demonstrate with dates and times and places exactly how the Kentucky courts are not enforcing existing election laws. They're refusing to enforce these laws because, in addition to bylaws, there's also statutes that say that all elections must be free and fair. That's the Kentucky Constitution, Section 6. All elections must be free and fair. If the Democrats continue to rig their own primaries, they will be violating the Kentucky Constitution and statutes, which say that you have to choose your nominee in a primary in May. You can't use any other method to choose your nominee, or else you're breaking the law.
Right.
So perhaps they're in legal trouble right now.